because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Chaos in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we are discussing Ramel Ross's second feature film, Nickel Boys. And we're positively delighted to welcome back to the show Bilge Ebiri. Bilge is a film critic for Vulture and New York Magazine, and you've heard him here on this podcast discussing Oppenheimer, Bram Stoker's Dracula, In the Line of Fire, and Excalibur. So this is the fifth time. Welcome back to the show, Bilge.
Five Timers Club.
That's right.
Good to be here, guys.
Very excited to have you. And we want to talk. Okay, so we're going to jump into Nickel Boys in a second, but before we do, this is part of a little mini series we're doing. A couple 2024 movies, the other one being Nosferatu, which you just heard, and this one now, Nickel Boys. And so we just wanted to take the temperature of the room of how we thought about this was as far as the year in film, 2024. What were some highlights for you? How do you feel about 2024 as a film year, Bilge?
It's weird because so much of the conversation around the year, at least when you look at the reporting that's done around it, focuses on, the box office. And there was always this fear earlier in the year, at least, that the box office this year was going to be really low because of the strikes and because of kind of some of the COVID-related delays. And by the end of the year, it wound up being actually pretty close to what we had last year, which was generally considered a very good year. At the start of the summer, people were really worried because there were a couple of movies that didn't quite hit the way people expected them to, including my beloved The Fall Guy. But quality-wise, it's been a good year. It's been very encouraging for me to see movies like The Brutalist or A Complete Unknown or Nosferatu, any number of other films, Conclave, Baby Girl. Regardless of what I personally think of all of these movies, these are the kinds of films that we always say, oh, they're not making anymore. People aren't going to see them. And they are making them and people are going to see them. And it's nice to see that. I mean, obviously once upon a time, these would have been big studio movies. They're not anymore. They're also movies that are, pretty bold, pretty interesting that haven't done as well. I mean, Better Man is one of those movies. I mean, it's become kind of a joke, the Robbie Williams as a chimpanzee musical, which I love, and which is the kind of film that I think if and when people see it, they do love it. But it's like completely crashed and burned. And I mean, that's kind of funny too. It's sad, obviously, for the people who made the movie, but I don't know. I think that will probably actually add to that film's myth. That was a studio release. I mean, it's a Paramount release. Paramount also released September 5th, which I thought was a very good film. I can't tell how that's doing. I mean, I don't know if that film has gone wide or anything like that, which might be a sign that it isn't doing well. I don't know. But then there's something like Nickel Boys, which, I don't know if I ever thought Nickel Boys was going to set the box office on fire, but it has had a tough time of it. It was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed Nickel Boys and The Brutalist were in the same number of theaters. Like one was in 8 theaters and one was in 6 theaters. I think actually Brutalist was in 6 theaters and Nickel Boys was in 8 theaters. And their box office was not that different at that time. But like everybody in my feed, which is not necessarily a scientific gauge of anything, was talking about The Brutalist, and nobody was talking about Nickel Boys. And it's funny because around that time I tweeted something like, "We're not talking enough about the fact that Nickel Boys is the best American film of the year." The kind of thing that 10 years ago you would have tweeted, and you would have gotten a little bit of engagement, mostly from people who agreed with you, and now you just get like mountains of abuse
Aw.
because not like it wasn't like really bad abuse. No, but it was a lot of people responding to me talking about how they couldn't see the film,
Uh-huh.
but it was like they were angry, like almost as if I was somehow the reason they couldn't see the
see.
film. And I was kind of like, I am trying to
Yeah.
get people to talk about the movie so
Yeah.
people will see the movie,
Yeah.
and then you might actually get to see the film,
Yeah.
like we're all on the same side here, folks, presumably. But, I mean, it's social media. People are not really engaging. They just want to yell at somebody. Or yell about something,
I mean,
which
do you
was
think-
what I was doing.
do you
Which is
think
what
this-
I was doing. So it's all the same.
Is this so Nickel Boy's release has been very sort of spotty, and we live in a major metropolitan area, and the film was only released here last week, I think.
And it's in independent cinemas
and
only
it's
right
only
now,
in the
not in like an
independent cinemas.
AMC's.
It's not in any of the larger theaters.
So here's something that's a little odd that I discovered today, because I was tweeting about Nickel Boys again today, partly in preparation for the podcast. It is January 19th. Tomorrow is, Inauguration Day.
Yep.
It's also, unfortunate coincidence, Martin Luther King Day.
Yep.
Martin Luther King's birthday. And this weekend, actually, Nickel Boys did go a little wider. It went out to like, I think 220 screens. But I was tweeting about the fact that, people don't, it's not doing well financially. I mean, it's just like, it's not, for the limited release it's not really making a lot of money. And I went to see it at the Angelica in New York earlier. I'd seen it already, but I wanted to see it again. I was in New York. I had some time to kill, so I was like, hey, I'll go see Nickel Boys in a theater. And I went to see it at the Angelica. And it was, it was an empty room. I mean, there were a couple of people there. There was really nobody. Also, like, busted subwoofer. It was not a prime presentation, right? Or premium presentation. It was, again, I want to compare it a little bit to The Brutalist, because the way that A24 has handled The Brutalist and the way that MGM, UA / Orion / Amazon has handled Nickel Boys, I mean, it's like night and day. And to be fair, A24 is really good at this stuff, but like A24 has created such a want to see factor around The Brutalist. It's, we're showing it in 70 millimeter. It was shot in VistaVision. There's an intermission. It's 3.5 hours long. Can you survive The Brutalist? It's like they turned it into a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
These are all things that are making me crawl away from it. I mean, not the VistaVision, but the 3.5 hour intermission.
These are all things that we're supposed to actually turn us off. But like, people always, 3.5 hour art film.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's part of the
that's
challenge.
The thing we're not supposed to go see. And yet they're so good at making that, like, to show how much of a man you are.
Yeah.
It's like raw dogging on a film, like on a flight. It's like going to see Brutalist and like drinking a whole Coke and not going to the bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. Like I went to see Brutalist at New York Film Festival, right, at Alice Tully Hall, giant auditorium, and I mean, people have remarked on this at screenings as well. At the intermission, the first time ever, the men's room line was making around the auditorium. There's like nobody in the ladies' room line. It's like the men's room line was just going everywhere, and it's all like, it's all dudes.
You have nothing to worry about, Laura.
What?
Nothing to worry about. You'll be able to get to the bathroom.
Thank goodness.
No, but A24 has done a good job of selling it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And, awards and things like that help. But Nickel Boys has been winning tons of awards as well. And Nickel Boys, there's just no want to see, oh my God, you got to see this factor. And they haven't really sold, I don't even know what they've sold. I haven't seen a single trailer. I'm at the movies all the time, dude. Like, I don't know what the trailer for Nickel Boys looks like.
Yeah.
I've seen the trailer for Brutalist. I've seen the trailer for Baby Girl. I've seen the trailer for every fucking movie.
Yeah.
Still haven't seen the trailer for Nickel Boys. And it's such a movie that's like, you really should go see this in a theater. And it is a movie that you can get people to actually come to the theater to see, because it is kind of an experience, and it is kind of a a formally bold, interesting that you might want to actually argue about afterwards, because not everybody loves the approach. Like I said this earlier today, again on Twitter or wherever. It was like we used to argue, or not we, people used to argue. People used to get in fights over Antonioni movies. Like these were like controversial. There were like riots at the screenings of La Ventura, and it was never going to happen. But in a weird way, I sort of wish that could happen with a movie like Nickel Boys, because its approach is really distinctive and worth engaging with as to whether it succeeds or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. So I mean, the thing that struck me about Nickel Boys, so when we were talking about the which film to do and you suggested it, and almost immediately after that, all the critics list started coming in, and it was topping every critic's top 10, or at least on the top 10s. I was just so, there was such a uniformity to this. And then I was thinking, oh, well, it's going to be a big awards contender. And it has, won, or whatever. It has been on sort of these smaller awards committees lists. I mean, well, we'll see whether it's represented at the Oscars, but it very well may get no Oscar nominations.
Yeah. It feels like a movie that's going to get either blanked at the Oscars,
right,
or it's going to get that weird little, here's a Best Picture nomination, and here's a Best Cinematography nomination, or here's a Best Screenplay. Like,
right.
It feels like one of those like also ran type. And look, a film like this, it's never going to win Best Picture from the Oscar Academy. That was not in the cards. But I mean, it's extraordinary work all around, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So obviously, I think it should be nominated in a million categories. But it does feel like one of those, and and this does feel like something that happens with certain movies, and sadly, very often they are movies that tackle social issues, and very often they are movies about race.
Yeah.
I mean, something like that happened to Selma, right? It got Best Picture and it got Best Screenplay, and that was it. Which is like such a weird. Oh, actually, it had a Best Song nomination, right? Which I think it might have even won. But which is such a weird kind of like. It gives off this vibe of, we didn't even watch this movie. We're just going to give it like this nomination because we're sure it's very worthy.
Yeah.
And I do get that vibe too from people. It's like, I did my part. I retweeted a review. I'll see it eventually. Like there's this kind of weird sort of, I don't know, man. Like this assumption that this will be worthy. I don't need to like go out and see it now. I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it'll make me feel really bad. Like there's this kind of, which this film, that's what makes me so upset about the way it's been released, because I'm like, this film actually is like more than that.
Yeah.
It's such a big swing directorially. Like it is such a like, no, you got to fucking see this movie so we can talk about it, because it's insane what he does with this film.
Let's do this. So since there may be some people in the audience who are listening who haven't yet seen it, and we're about to spoil the movie, so why don't we, before we do that, give a little pitch? We used to do this especially for new releases, or for movies that I was like, maybe not everybody has seen it. Let's go around the room and do like our 10-second pitch for the movie, because I think Bilge's got a 20-minute pitch for it lined up.
Oh my gosh, I have a snarky one.
Okay.
I really love this movie, but I have a snarky one.
Do you want to start? Do you want to start with your snarky pitch? We'll go snarky to
okay. Okay. Then I'll have my time to actually talk about why I love this movie.
Of course, we're going to talk about why we love it. But
so I'd be like, do you like the imagery of late Malick, but wish it had a plot? Here you go.
So there
Nickel
it is.
Boys.
Okay. So there's a lot of people who like Terrence Malick films, and if you like Malick, you'll be interested in Nickel Boys. I think that's totally right. Bilge, do you have a pitch?
They don't go to see those in the theater either.
That's true. That's true. But I think there is a contingent of people who might be taken by Malick, but might think of Nickel Boys as a kind of like, as something a bit more, like weirdly a bit more sort of mainstream and sort of by the numbers, sort of make you feel guilty as a white person type movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that. And anyway, so it's if that could sway some members of the audience. Bilge, what would be your pitch for Nickel Boys for someone who hasn't, knows nothing about the film?
I don't know. It's like Tree of Life meets the Defiant Ones,
Yeah.
Which is it's nothing like the Defiant Ones, but that's like a reference point in the movie. it's like what if the Tree of Life was a prison movie, or what if Days of Heaven was a prison movie? Something like
Yeah.
that. I mean, that would be kind of how I might try to sell it, but I also say, oh, it's based on a Pulitzer Prize winning novel.
The way I think of this is the kind of pitch that only gets someone like me in there, but then again, there might be someone like me who's listening and would think of this as cool. But I think this year actually was a year in which there was a lot of interesting formal innovation happening. We talked about not necessarily innovation, but at least innovation of style. And we talked about Oppenheimer. But I think 2024, there were a number of genuine formal innovations in filmmaking that took place. I won't list them all here because we'll talk about them in the Blobskers in our next episode, but there were a number of them. But Nickel Boys has, I think, a genuine formal innovation at its core that is really interesting and really nicely done. And if you're interested in the sort of film conventions and film language, and you think, oh, I've seen everything, right? Like I've seen a lot of movies. There's not much more that can be done. It's just variations on a theme. The answer is no. I think there are new things that can be done, and Nickel Boys is one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Here still in theaters, Justin? Speaking.
No, Here is not still in theaters.
I still haven't seen Here. I want to see Here.
Dustin's very excited about the film language innovations in that
there
one.
There are film language innovations in Here, Bilge.
I'm sure there are. He does nothing but innovate.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Sometimes you wish he'd just stop innovating and just like make a movie, but I shouldn't say that. I like Zemeckis and I wanted to see Here, but it just came out at a time when I was this is not happening.
Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Wasn't around for long. What was I going to say? Oh, that's the thing with Ramel Ross. So did you guys ever see Hale County this
No,
morning?
so we have not seen his documentary, unfortunately, yeah.
So that documentary came out in, I believe, 2017, 2018, 2017, I think. And I saw it at Sundance. I saw it, it was the first film I saw at Sundance that year. Like it was like morning screening, right after I arrived or something like that. And it blew me away. Like it totally blew me away. And that film, I don't know how much you know about that film, but it's shot. I don't know how to it's like as hard to describe as Nickel Boys in a way. It's shot in this very sort of lyrical, fragmentary style, very impressionistic. He is a photographer. That's his background, and he was actually down in Alabama, I think, teaching photography and coaching basketball, and he had lived there for a few years and gotten to know these kids and kind of decided to start making a film about them. But the film is, I mean, it takes place over the course of a few years. It's a documentary, obviously. And it charts these kids' lives, from high school and beyond. And it's, like each scene is kind of put together through like these kind of very fragmentary shots. Like you might see like an edge of a shoulder or the way shadow plays on a basketball court or something like that. It's again really hard to describe. It is a bit like, especially the opening passages of Nickel Boys, but still different. And the film is like 75 minutes long or something. It's not a long film, and it basically covers a giant arc of time. And it felt like, and I interviewed him at the time, and he confirmed this, but it felt almost like a rebuke isn't the word, because he wasn't like, these were films that he liked, but almost as a response or a corrective to sort of the longitudinal documentary approach, like the Hoop Dreams approach, which great movie, obviously, nothing against Hoop Dreams, but there have been a lot of films which is like, all right, here are these, filmmakers, often white, not always, but like they're going to go and like spend 5 years in South Side of Chicago or wherever, and they're going to, document the lives of these people, and we're going to see it in all its suffering and hope and pain and tragedy and everything. And the result is going to be like a 4-hour, butt buster documentary that's going to get a lot of acclaim, and we're all going to watch it, and we're going to be like, oh my God, how painful, tragic, wonderful, artful, blah, blah, blah. and his approach was like, there's something very kind of reductive about this very totalizing thing, almost as if like, here's the full picture, here's this big novelistic thing.
I see.
This is what these people's lives are like. This is the reality. Here it is. 4 hours. You've enjoyed. You now know what these people's lives are like.
It's like tidy, too tidy, or something like that.
Tidy. And again, we're like, a lot of these movies are fucking great movies. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a kind of, we're not like there's nothing wrong necessarily with the approach. And it comes from a good place, and it often results in great filmmaking, and it's probably a necessary approach. But his filmmaking was kind of like, there's something about this world that we're not capturing, and it's maybe not possible to capture, which is kind of the mystery and the wonder of life. Like, this is not like a diorama that like kind of contains everything in it. Like, these are human beings, and we're never really going to know what their lives are like. And how do we tell a story? How do we depict their lives and give a sense of their lives without feeling like we've reduced their lives, right? And I think Hale County does that magnificently. But so I saw that morning at Sundance, I see this movie, and I'm like, I feel like I just watched a new cinematic language being born, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like this. I did not know it was possible to tell an entire story like this. Like, when people try to make movies like that, usually fails for me. And this was the first time I saw, and not that I've ever seen someone tell a story like that, but like these kind of like fragmentary documentaries don't generally work for me. But this was so beautifully done. The imagery was so kind of exacting, but also mysterious, that I walked away from it thinking I've never seen a movie like this. I don't know if I will ever see another movie like this, but my God, And of course, then I was like, oh my God, it might just be overreacting. It's like my first film at Sundance, and I'm raving. But sure enough, the film won a lot of acclaim.
Yeah.
It was nominated for an Oscar, and I did later interview Ramel, and he was like, "Man, when I saw your review of that movie, I was like, because my first line was like, it's not every day that you see you witness a new cinematic language being born," and he was just like that like just made the whole thing worthwhile.
Oh, that's
Oh.
amazing.
It was nice to hear, and
Yeah.
it's on the poster.
Oh.
I always feel very proud of that, because I'm
Wow.
like, it felt like I was worried I was overreacting at the time, and then I was like, no, I was absolutely right. Like,
Yeah.
I do actually feel like I was correct about this movie. So when Nickel Boys, I saw it at Telluride, which was where it had its world premiere. So none of us knew anything about it other than obviously that it was based on the Colson Whitehead novel. I went into it pretty worried, right? I was like, I mean, Mel Ross makes this great documentary, then he gets roped into a studio prestige adaptation, literary adaptation,
Yep.
big social issue kind of movie. Obviously has a lot of weight to it. I mean, it's just like there's such a long history of documentarians who wind up making narrative films and fall on their faces, or just get basically, kind of get their get all the stuff that makes them interesting kind of strained out of them, and then they just become, and then in a few years he'll be doing a Bond movie or whatever, or he'll be, here's his Amazon Prime series,
Yep.
like it just feels like that's what's going to happen, right? Because he's not a big, I mean, he got the Oscar nomination, but he's not like, he's a guy who teaches, photography at Brown, I think,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he's, so the movie starts, we're just like, and it's, how the film starts, and it's, again, sort of these fragmentary, almost, these lyrical impressionistic images, and it's, told through point of view, and I'm watching him, well, this is marvelous. I'm sure this will be like the first 10, 15 minutes, kind of a,
Prelude.
opening passage kind of thing, and then it'll settle into whatever the movies are going to be. And I'm like, oh no, it's like this is he is committed to this,
Yeah.
and I, you know, and then obviously, and then the switch happens,
Yeah.
and then the archival stuff is brought in. I'm sorry, I've been monologuing, but I just had to kind of relay my experience with this movie because I was so worried that this thing that he was just going to be like completely neutered by the overwhelming, gravity of this project. And I was just like, oh my God, he actually did it again. Like again, he has done something that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And it works so marvelously. And it's like eye-opening, and you just walk out of the movie like having, it's like what we call subway grate movies. Like you walk out of the movie and even a subway grate looks different. Like everything.
That is the power of a good photographer, truly.
Yeah.
Like that is, they can make you see the world differently. And Ramel Ross has that power, I think. I just want to start with a brief overview of the film. And by the way, now we will be spoiling the film because I think inevitably to talk about the film, you will have to spoil certain elements of it.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't seen the film, please go do so now. Nickel Boys is, as already mentioned, an adaptation of the Colson Whitehead novel, The Nickel Boys. It tells the story of two young African-American boys during Jim Crow era American South, Elwood and Turner, who are sent to a segregated juvenile rehabilitation center called Nickel Academy. It chronicles their time at Nickel, but also afterwards as if through recollection and imagination. It's a beautiful film about unspeakable tragedy that finds significance within the small and quiet moments between the events that define a life. And that's the thing I want to start with. So I think one of the ways I would put back to you that you were saying to us, Bilge, is that the film is, you're saying, fragmentary and lyrical, and one way to sort of some specific parts that are like that are that the film's generally is focused on I think interstitial moments, the moments between the big events that are maybe less. They're not the moments you would necessarily journal about. But they're the moments that you might remember they might pop up in your mind later on. And there are all these little moments of that. The movie is fragmentary in the sense that they're just like these little vignettes of scenes that are almost shapeless, that kind of come and go and are are edited through with archival footage and photographs and things. The film jumps forward and backwards in time. But it's always focused on these little moments, just like a conversation between friends. Or one of the ones I really liked was there's just this shot of it's again first person Elwood looking at Turner, and Turner's just he's just lounging in his bed listening to the radio, and there's like nothing happening, but it's just, it evokes so much. There's just like the quiet breeze. And I just, in that moment, I was taking notes throughout the entire film. And in that moment I wrote, some of this is just capturing the monotony of these boys' lives. Like they were beaten and tortured and boys were killed and lots of horrible things happen, all of which happens off screen. But he doesn't focus on that. Instead, he focuses on these moments of kind of just silence, quietudes, solace in a way. And I think that is a big part of what speaks to that kind of lyricism in the filmmaking.
So I was thinking of like a movie I could pair Nickel Boys with. And there are obvious ones. I mean, Hale County would be a great one to pair it with, or like a Malick film. But the one I was thinking of was like the film I keep thinking of, even though they bear almost nothing in common with each other, is Wim Wenders' Perfect Days.
Okay. Yes.
Which I don't know if you guys saw, but it was
not yet. No.
Okay.
We should see it.
You should see it. It's really good. I think you guys would really like it, by the way. Like seriously. It's one of my favorite films from last year. Last year? It was last year, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Year before. Or not last year, year before, because we're 2025 now, of 2023. Perfect Days is about a guy in Tokyo who cleans toilets for a living, right? And it's just the monotony of his day, just the stuff he does over the course of his day. That's all the movie is. And it's beautiful. I mean, you watch this thing, and by the end of the movie, you're ready to go clean toilets in Tokyo. Like it's you're just like this. It's like the first person I've ever seen on screen in a movie who seems genuinely happy with his life. And obviously, like I said, very different movie from Nickel Boys. But the thing that the two films have in common is this sense of, the wonder of life is in its monotony, right? The wonder of life is in the interstitial moments, not the kind of big events. The big events are kind of maybe the story or the overall arc of a life, but really what makes life worth living. And again, I mean, this was something that I wrote a lot about. I wrote a lot about Perfect Days, but one of the things I compared it to was Wings of Desire, which is the other Wim Wenders film, about the angels over Berlin, and how they just want to live. They're angels, but they kind of want to live the lives of normal people. And there's a great scene with Peter Falk, who it turns out he's playing Peter Falk. Peter Falk is playing Peter Falk, and it turns out he used to be an angel himself. But he's talking to one of the angels who humans can't see, but because he was an angel, I think, like, knows the guy's there, and he's just like, I know you. I know you. I can't see you, but I know you're there. And he is telling the guy about how great life is. Cup of coffee, cigarette. There's so many good things in life. He says. And that's sort of what I keep thinking about with a film like Nickel Boys, because that's obviously the film is tragic, right? I mean, this is awful what happens to these kids. But the tragedy of a life that's cut short, or a life that is ruined in some way, is obviously the what happens to them is significant and important, but like, it's what's taken away. Right? I mean,
Yes.
right, that's like the wonder of life and the beauty of life that's taken away from you. And so by highlighting that, the film is showing us what's taken away, and then by putting us behind the eyes of these characters, and specifically Elwood, it draws us into his life through images that we can all relate to, right? I mean, he's living in Jim Crow South, but these are all universal images. I mean, he's not, and Ramel Ross has said, these are all stuff, mostly images from my life too. I mean, some of them are in the book, but they're not incredibly specific to that time period. They're just things you would remember. I mean, letting a balloon drift into a ceiling fan to see what might happen. I've done that,
Wrapping something around your finger when you're listening to a conversation and you're nervous, that.
Or the way, a deck of cards looks like or feels like when it's being shuffled. Like, all these things that you can relate to texturally, emotionally, and what's beautiful about the film is that because he's giving you kind of so many of these, what really happens is you start to think of your own things. Like, I keep imagining a scene where Elwood is rubbing his grandmother's or a woman's fingernails, right? That's not in the movie. Like, that's a memory I have as a kid with my mom, which was one of the things that would comfort me as a kid was I would rub my mom's fingernails, and I would be upset if they were really smooth. There needed to be ridges there, and that calmed me down. I keep thinking that's like part of the movie, but like, that's just the movie makes you dream along with it in that way, and so you absorb this point of view because the film is shot from that point of view, and then suddenly you're Elwood, and there's that. I mean, I've talked about this before. I talked about this on the film comment podcast. But there's this moment in the film that, I mean, people talk about certain moments in the film. There's one moment in the film that really strikes me and is like one of the most kind of evocative, incredible scenes I've ever seen in a movie. And we've seen glimpses of Elwood through the first part of the movie. We see him like reflected in the steam iron, and we see him reflected in the shop window, and we see like the little photographs that he takes. But it's actually the first time that the perspective switches
Mm-hmm.
to Turner, right? And then suddenly, like, we're looking at this kid, and we suddenly realize that the scene that we've just seen is playing
Again.
over again, and
Yep.
that we're now in, because we've just met Turner, and suddenly we're in his perspective, and we see Elwood. That movie, that moment is chilling to me, because it's just like, oh my God, like there's Elwood, like there he is. And it's like that, I said this in my review, it's like the Freud's theory of the mirror stage of a child's development, like when they first see themselves in a mirror and suddenly have a sense of themselves as like a being in the world. Obviously Elwood has already been through this, he's seen himself, but it's like we kind of go through that stage at that moment, right? It's suddenly, it's like, I mean, it's just so striking to me, because when you first see him and he's so shy, and it's just like your heart goes out to him, but also because you're like that's me.
That's what I look like.
Wait, there I am. That's me. I just saw myself. Like, it's such a weird,
the feeling too, like if you hear your voice recorded, like on a podcast, or watch a picture of yourself doing an expression you've never seen yourself do in a mirror before, because it's like, and you're like, what? That's what I look like. That's what I sound like. That's what other people see. And I saw,
like when podcasters, do the screen grab of the conversation for their tweet promoting the podcast. I'm just like, why did you do that? I can see myself.
Ramel Ross talked about black double consciousness, which was not something I had been aware of. Have you heard of that, Justin?
Please tell us.
Okay.
Please teach us, Laura.
It's just first described, I think it were written by W.E.B. Du Bois as the experience. Du Bois. Really?
Yep.
I've been saying that wrong this whole time. Thank you, honey.
Okay.
W.E.B. Du Bois. The black experience of always looking at oneself through the eyes of a racist white society and measuring yourself by the means of a nation that looked back in contempt. In this case, I mean, Turner is not the white perspective, but we do have opportunities, I think, to kind of see Elwood being looked at from the white perspective. But just, I think there's like that strangeness, that doubling of having a vision of yourself and what you look like. And I did make an idea in my head of what I thought Elwood would look like. And then when it flipped on me and I got to see myself/Elwood in Turner's perspective, it was like very unsettling.
Mm-hmm. He looks, well, I mean, I'll just report from my own experience in that case. He looks so young.
Yeah.
And I did think, like, I weirdly expected him to look older. I don't know.
Well, because what we know
so
about
young.
him too is that he's like academically gifted, and he's like a 16-year-old going to college, and he's pretty articulate he's gone to these protests, and he's like, holds up MLK as an emblem for what he wants to be. And like we know he's smart and poised, and to see him kind of hunched over his food, shoveling it in, so scared, so young. It was a very different image than what I had conjured at before.
That contrast between him and Turner. Turner is more composed,
worldly.
He's more worldly. He's been there. He's the one who's going to be guiding him and teaching him. He looks older. I believe the actor is older. And then when you see Elwood, then you're like, oh my God, this poor kid is so young, and he's so gangly. Like he's growing into himself, but he's not there yet. And he's not to mention that he's about to be, because again, the other thing that I was just, that's just heartrending about this is all around them are even younger boys who are, no little bit older than our son, and they're being beaten and tortured just alongside these other sort of boys who are growing into men. But just to think of how young all of these kids are and what they're having to go through, what they're having to process as they go through that is remarkable. And it's remarkable that the movie makes you think all that without depicting any of it. It's the anti of like, let me depict the suffering of Black folk for you to experience and deal with.
Which is another reason why I actually so I get so annoyed that the film has not found an audience, because I do hear from people, I think it's just going to be like too hard to watch.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say it's like, oh no, it's fun to watch. You don't want to say like, like, oh no, it's not tough at all. Like it's fine. It's beautiful. It is tough. I mean, it's not a tough to watch movie, but it is a very upsetting film. But it's also beautiful.
It's
and
beautiful.
weird way kind of joyous. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you mentioned, some of those kids are not that much older than your son. You know, Elwood is my son's age. Like my son is 15, and he's 15 when he's taken in the movie. And I did think a lot about my son watching the movie as well, because because you're watching, I mean, you're seeing through his eyes him growing up,
Yep.
right? And all the little wonderful things of life that he's responding to. And as a parent, you've been through that,
Yep.
right? Like you've seen that happen to your child. So I mean, it's like, I mean, there is this double consciousness. It's not the black double consciousness, but there is the double consciousness of being aware of kind of yourself, and then yourself is kind of a body and a physical object, and how others see you and all that. But then there's also this, I mean, I don't know, almost the triple consciousness of being a parent, because
Yes,
there's
right,
also
sure.
this sort of,
Yeah.
Projecting yourself back into your
Right.
child through your own experiences.
Right. And you don't want to be like, oh my God, this could be my kid, because obviously the part of the point of it is that like this happened to a specific group of people who are not my kid,
Yep.
and that's the monstrosity of it. You don't want to kind of like, that's kind of the doubling that's also happening, which is that this is not a thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
I was safe from this.
Yep.
But by placing you in this perspective, it gives you a sense of that sense. It makes you feel the menace and the heartbreak and the tragedy of it in a way that I don't think you would necessarily if you were watching this in the sort of traditional format of just watching, two-dimensional beings get, kind of brutalized.
Yep.
Not that those films are bad either. Again,
Yeah.
it's not a
No. It's a
it's a
different.
response
different.
and kind of an expansion and
Yeah.
a corrective to a certain extent, but
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean make those other movies bad.
No.
But it is interesting because I did talk to some people who were like, yeah, the perspective, the point of view didn't work for me. I was kind of unmoved by the movie. Excuse me. Because I feel like if it had been more conventional, it would have been more moving. And I'm like, it might have been more moving if it was more conventional. Like that's not.
Yep.
I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know. But like I've seen lots of films that are incredibly powerful, that are, obviously much more conventional. But I think the film is giving you the space to question that. Like, why does that move me in such a way? And is that kind of
Manipulative or false?
it's like and like
Voyeuristic.
those are all loaded words. So again, like there are a lot of great movies
Of
that
course.
do that.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, is there a manipulative and exploitative, a cheapening that happens, or almost a kind of carnival show quality of here's 2 hours and you're gonna watch X group of people get humiliated and tortured and brutally beaten and killed or whatever, and you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel good about yourself for feeling terrible. And
Right.
it's going to be kind of, and maybe it'll be
Right.
really disturbing. So you won't be able to have dinner afterwards or
Yeah.
something. But like there is, again, it's this, when you want to show great historical tragedies and crimes, how do you do it?
Yep.
Because then there's all this, it's like, people do this. There's always this question about how do you depict the Holocaust,
Yep.
right? A lot of people say you can't depict it, right? And people have danced around that idea. And then sometimes people have depicted it, and then people, oh my God, how dare you? And then people have done kind of, you look at something like Schindler's List, obviously, which is kind of the big movie in that space. But, he, I think, dances around it very elegantly, shows what he can and shows what he doesn't. He does not show certain things. And there were people that were really upset that he didn't, right? Like there were people who were really upset that Spielberg has a scene where people go into the showers and they turn out to be just showers, right? But then there is this like, very kind of tense moment when you don't know what they're going to be, and everybody's terrified, and they're like, oh, this is manipulative, I guess, but also, maybe you need a little bit of manipulation for something like that. I don't know, like again, it's a conversation one can have about
That's
this
right.
stuff, and people have been having it. But like, what a fascinating way to do it.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think it is an aesthetic and artistic dilemma, as you put it. Like, what do you do? How do you tell these stories? And you might feel as someone whose family or whose group, ethnic or whatever, spiritual or otherwise, is on the receiving end, or the perpetrators of that, you might feel an obligation to tell those stories. And so then you're in a real double bind, because how do you tell them? Because you don't want to tell them in an exploitative or manipulative way. You also don't want to tell them in a way that cheapens it. You also don't want to tell them in a way that avoids certain things which might seem essential to the stories. I mean, I think it is a real artistic dilemma, and the film is trying something new in that space. It's trying to tell those stories in a way that's different. And in that regard, by itself, it's a success. But because I think anytime you do it in a different way, that's a success, regardless of whether it works on its own terms. I think separately from that, it does work on its own terms, for me at least, because I got lost in the first person perspective almost immediately, to the point where when we switch and we get the doubling scene, I almost gasped. I immediately was like, oh, no, he's doing this. I was writing it down. And then when we get the sort of shift to the future and the behind the third person perspective, similarly, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Because beyond those jumps, I was completely lost, as though the film language disappeared the way it does in a conventional film, where you don't think of cuts and you don't think of shot choice and that sort of stuff. I didn't think of any of that stuff. Yeah. And that's really crazy, because you guys mentioned in either your interview with Ramel or your I think it was in your interview, but you talk about other first person perspective movies, entirely POV movies.
Right.
And one of them is Hardcore Henry. And the others are like any found footage movie or whatever, And those are, I find, very hard to lose the artifice of the film. You're always cognizant of the lens through which you're seeing the world in those. They always draw attention to themselves. But this, it disappeared. And I think that is that's to me what the thing that was the most innovative, is that it was able to do this, hold the POV for the entire time, and do it in a way where it all just disappeared.
You just melt into it.
And I have some thoughts about how he did that, technically how he did it, but I just want to point that out, that I think, was it the same for you guys? I mean, I was just lost in it.
Yeah. It took me a second. Like when we sat down, I'll be frank, when we sat down for the overture, I was like, oh, this is an arty movie, huh? Okay. Because I didn't know.
Laura, you present yourself as like this complete, like you would never guess the kind of person you actually are, because you're like, huh.
I went in cold, and like we showed up, we like got our popcorn, and like there were no previews. We just sat down into it, like, because we were running a little late, and I was like, okay, like this is 2.5 hours. Okay. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hook in, because I do find, sometimes I find movies that are a little bit more fragmented and a little less plot heavy, sometimes a little hard to hook into. But within like 10 minutes, I was riveted. Like I definitely needed to go to the bathroom, but I didn't, because I needed to watch this whole thing through all the way through. And I couldn't leave his perspective. It felt like abandonment. So like, And
it's also a film where it feels like if you leave partway through, it'd be very hard to catch up, because the film is not following any traditional narrative.
I was like, what would you say if I came back and be like, what I missed?
I know, I'd be like, you missed a grasshopper and a hand and I don't know, a room.
Yeah. But also like really emotional stuff that I can't now explain back to you.
Yeah.
I had to be there. Like I had to lock eyes with it for an hour, for 2.5 hours. It was gorgeous.
I think the reason why the perspective, the point of view works. Yeah, I mean, like you said, a lot of people have tried the point of view thing. and I think I said this in my interview with Rommel. It's like the only person I know who succeeded is Gaspar Noé with Enter the Void.
Yeah. And
But
I
that's also
really didn't like Enter the Void.
Laura hates
Okay,
Enter
a
the
lot
Void.
of people
I
don't
like
like
Enter
Enter
the Void, but
with the blinking, I'm so glad the blinking stopped. Holy God. That was one where I was
he
like,
died.
I can't.
yeah,
I
once he
know.
dies and becomes a spirit, then he
Phew.
doesn't have
But
eyes.
that was me sitting down being like, do I have to do this whole movie? Are we the whole movie? Are we doing this? And so I was
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, Gaspar Noé is one of those people. And by the way, Gaspar Noé, like he has that showmanship that he can sell these movies, right?
Yeah.
Like, this
Yeah.
movie needed a bit of Gaspar Noé showmanship, not
Correct.
stylistically, but
Yeah.
like they needed Ramel Ross needed to like bring Gaspar Noé along with him on screen because he loves Enter the Void apparently, but Enter the Void for me works because it's so fucking strange and it's like Tibetan Book of the Dead and all this other shit happening, right? It doesn't feel like it's trying to actually replicate human perspective.
Right.
The other ones do to a certain extent, and they fail because there's a fluidity in those movies because people are, it's point of view, so now the camera is going to go through these doors and it's going to now that's how people do point of view shots in movies that aren't POV movies. That's how De Palma does it, right? De Palma's the master of this stuff. I mean, he doesn't do entirely point of view movies, but he does do great point of view scenes in his movies, and they're long, elaborate, beautiful tracking shots, and it's masterful and suspenseful. And then there's the Pino Donaggio music, and it's great, right? I love De Palma. But when people try to do the whole fucking story point of view, you get this sense that they're trying to be ostensibly realistic, and it is anything but. It feels completely manufactured and staged and phony. And the reason for that, I think, is because that's not how humans see, right? We don't see in tracking shots. We don't see in fluidity. We really see in fragments, right? I mean, the brain processes these things, and I mean, that actually is how vision works. And then the brain kind of like,
puts it
the
together.
AI of the brain kind of fills in the details. Which is why there are all these theories. I mean, you're probably familiar with them, that there could be things in our world that we just don't see because our brain doesn't know how to process them, But what Ramel Ross does is he takes the point of view approach and then he crossbreeds it with the Hale County approach, which again, you guys haven't seen it, but it is very much of a piece with Nickel Boys, but it's not POV, right? Or there's a POV quality to it because of the way it's shot, but it's not, again, fragmented, impressionistic, lyrical. By fusing that with POV, he makes it work. And I think also he, because he's a photographer and has thought long and hard about this stuff, I think he and Joe Mofrey, the cinematographer, I mean, they worked really hard on this. Like, this wasn't just like, okay, here's, that guy walks and now you're going to go like this. Like, it's like they built like special rigs and they tested different types of movement and they created kind of this, I think they had like even like a whole manifesto with a bunch of rules and stuff like that. But they had some kind of idea about how human sight works and also how the human body works and how the human neck works. Like they had this whole thing where, like, I think Ramel mentions this in the interview, but you're always catching up. Like, as a human, you're always catching up. It's not like, because you see in these POV movies, like, camera's walking, somebody comes in, and then somebody speaks, and then the camera moves, and then somehow the camera always manages to move towards something right before it happens, right? And it's like, no, that's not how human sight works, right? You're always kind of playing catch up. And they capture those elements, right? Not just visually, right? The editing works in this way too. The sound works. The sound work in this movie is extraordinary. I mean, but yeah, so there's just like every kind of aspect of the craft has gone towards making this approach work, and it works. I mean, I do think this is the only time when an ostensibly realistic version of point of view has really worked.
I think they talk about in maybe I can't remember. I think it was a quote I got from the cinematographer what's his name? Joe Mofrey. Yeah, he said that it was about what it is not. It wasn't we weren't trying to capture how we see, but how it feels for us to see. And I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about it. And here's a way I think to just phenomenologically just do this yourself. So you can do this exercise where you kind of experience your entire field of view. You can kind of figure out where your field of view is by like holding up your hands and your peripheral vision. And you can see like my peripheral vision is like this. I'm holding up my hands and they're like right on the edges. It's like huge. So like your peripheral vision is quite large, and you can kind of attend to the entire space by holding up your hands until bringing them slowly before you until you can see them while looking straight ahead on either side. And so if you think about that, so focal length, I think a lot of times people think, okay, the human eye, what's the focal length of the human eye? Well, if you think of the total perspective from which you can see if you're looking dead center is really wide. And so people go for a super wide angle lens. And this is what you get with like Hardcore Henry. This GoPro is like this. GoPro's ultra wide. You mount it on the guy's head. So you're basically getting wherever the head goes, you're getting the eyes. And then you have a wide angle lens. So you're getting the almost fish eye type lens, right? Everything coming in. But in fact, you are only really attending to a small portion of your actual field of view at any given point. You're never attending to the whole thing. Of course, you can kind of you can consciously do this where you attend to everything, but most of the time you're not. You're attending, like think about when you're reading, you're attending to an incredibly narrow region of the space. And when you do that, your eyes are basically zooming in. I'm not quite, but they're basically zooming in. And so you're getting like a zoomed in focal length. And I think most of this film is shot with so-called normal focal length lenses, anywhere between sort of 50 millimeters, maybe even a little bit longer for some of the shots. So they're really quite zoomed in from that ultra wide lens. And that's, you might think, counterintuitive because you're like, well, I could see everything. Why would you pick a frame that's like this? But in fact, I think actually that captures the attentional part of our field of our vision. And what it also does is it allows them to use shallow depth of field, which he uses really well. Yeah. So you have a slightly more telephoto look. Then you have very, very wide aperture. So you have an incredibly shallow depth of field, which gets this really lovely blurred background and a tiny little plane that's in focus. And he does some interesting rack focusing periodically on, like an arm, and it's just rack focusing down the arm, just seeing the sliver of focus go down each hair. And that kind of conjures that feeling of, I think, memory. Memories are often fuzzy, right? So there's this kind of fuzziness to the stuff that's not right in the field of view. But also when you're intently focusing someone, so like when you focus on someone's face, like if I focus right now, Bilge, I can only focus on you on a screen, but if I focus on Laura, I can focus on her, and almost everything else kind of just goes out of focus, and you can really like zoom in on someone. And I think that is what he's capturing so well. And I think that because he's a photographer, he kind of intuitively knows that is the case, even though it's sort of contrary to, I think, how you might have initially thought to do POV. There's that scene, I think Elwood is speaking to Hattie, his grandma, who's just come to visit him at Nickel, and he looks down at her hands in a very important moment. And she says, and I guess this was improvised by her part because the camera operator, I think who was Jomo, was looking down, and she says, "No, you need to look at me." And then the camera pans up to catch her right dead center. And I think that kind of stuff is, it's something, it's like magical. It's not real vision, but it's like how we imagine vision or something like that. How we remember vision.
I think too, the throne, they call it the throne gaze is what they were calling it, or like those macro shots when they have a shallow depth of field and they're looking at something. It also sort of gets he's talked about how it gets he talks about that's his way of depicting history, replacing or reproducing an archive that doesn't exist. And when we have that kind of rich imagery, when we're inside the eyes of Elwood or Turner, and then with the interstitial images, we get an archaeological image of something that's been pulled out of the ground from Nickel.
Right.
You get a real sense of like how much information, how much story, how much personality, the real texture of these people's lives is just like gone forever. Like that was taken from them and it's been taken from us. Because I think like he shows you things that then come up later and you didn't even know what you were seeing. Like we see buttons with the like black and white, like it's like a forensic, archaeological forensic photograph. But we've seen those same objects in either Elwood or Turner's point of view. A marble coming down the stairs, and then we see the marbles all laid out, 12 of them. Or the thing that like really hit me was like when the first moment where we sort of understand what's really happening to Nickel, when we go to the ice house or the White House, like we don't actually see anybody get beaten. We get like almost like a pinhole view on another kid's button on his shirt. And we later see probably not the same button. Who's to know? That's the point. We don't know. All of this is lost when it's just been like layered under the dirt. But when you see a button later on, thrown up on the screen like that, that's what immediately, like, it has like such a different meaning now that you've been inside his experience.
It's like a recontextualization of the kind of of the imagery that you would normally get.
And Mel Ross talked about this in interviews as well. But like, when he talks about how, so much of the imagery of Black Americans that you get from that period, I mean, quite aside from the stuff, the horrible stuff here that we get in the archival stuff, is, pictures of people at protests or pictures of people, being chased by dogs or whatever, like all the sort of historical images, right? And, he's trying to think, okay, how can I kind of breathe life into these people so that there's more than that, right? That's not all it is, right?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of a conjuring of these people, and to give them full life, to not just turn them into these two-dimensional actor puppets that then proceed to go and have the things done to them that we see in the archival stuff. Like, how do we create a life for these people, and a sense of a life, and a sense of what it felt to be alive? Because that's really what's most important. That's the tragedy of all of this, and that's why I think the final image of the movie, which is Elwood, reaching his hand out and sort of picking us up, it's like, I never know what to make of that. Is that supposed to, are we Turner again? Like, is this Turner, or is it him? Or is this just kind of the sense of like, bringing up out of the ground, these bits and pieces and fragments that we have, and sort of bringing them fully into life? Like, what are we watching at that moment?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful moment. It's very emotional. And I don't know what it's like. If I had to describe what it actually is, I would not be able to do it. But that's what's beautiful about it,
It's almost like the film is like sort of, a hybrid of a documentary and it's like a docufiction hybrid, in the sense that in that, we have all this all the interstitial footage is like often archival footage, photographs of the real Dozier School, or what was it called? The Dozier Academy, or the Dozier School for Boys, which is what the Nickel Academy is based off of. And then all this archival footage, and then space footage, and and then archival footage of like, marathons and things, and just all being kind of interspersed. And then when when he sort of picks up the camera and he does the selfie at the end, it's almost like, it's like he's blending the genres of documentary and fiction film in this way that I think, where that is like a kind of like capstone on that, in a way. Like the actor is sort of recognizing the camera that has been on him the whole time, in a way, that we've been seeing him through. So one thing that we've been talking a lot about the formal dimensions of the film and how they work to reinforce the wing that Ramel Ross is trying to do in it. But there is one of the big themes in the film, I think, resonates with me right now in this. We're one day before Trump's inauguration. And one of the themes is these sort of contrasting outlooks on race and progress that are embodied by Elwood and Turner, these two contrasting outlooks. So Elwood being the kind of optimist, he believes change is possible. He believes in the kind of nonviolent sort of protest pioneered by, well, not, I don't know, pioneered, but like, embodied by Martin Luther King Jr. And he is a committed, he's an idealist in that way. But then contrastively, Turner is a cynic, right? He's a pragmatist. He thinks the system is rigged and that you should look the other way, get what's yours, stay within the system and stay alive, right? Stay safe. And periodically, and this is borne out in many ways throughout their characters, but most importantly, they have this conversation, I think, right in the middle of the film. And Elwood says at one point, if everybody looks the other way, then everybody's in on it. Of course, he's referring also to them. If I look the other way, I'm as implicated as the rest, and that's not how it's supposed to be. And, I do think this speaks to these sort of two big things of any type you're confronted with an unjust system that, of course, you are in some way a part of. You have the choice to resist or not. And, we're facing this right now. What do you think the film is trying to say about these two perspectives? And I think to some extent, this is going to have to do with how we want to interpret the end of the film and sort of Turner's arc in the course of the events of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I got the sense that, I think he even says something, I can't remember exact line, but you do get the sense that he is re-engaging with this in a way that is going to lead to more. So yeah, I didn't, I mean, it's a little more ambiguous in the film, obviously. But that's how that's where
that's your interpretation of
going.
It. Yeah. Because I think then on that interpretation, it is more like the arc of Turner is that he comes more towards Elwood's side of things.
But also he becomes Elwood.
Becomes right? Elwood. Yes, that's right. That's right.
I mean, that's symbolically also. I mean, that's obviously there's the sense that he's living for both of them.
Yes.
I mean, he's kind of embodying the formal approach of the movie. Too. Yeah. It's obviously that way in the novel as well. But there is the sense though that both of these people now exist within him.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the idea. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think the film has a specific side that it's falling towards. I mean, I think its idea is that, listen, there's no right answer here. I mean, would we say, I mean, obviously, given everything we know about Elwood and what happens to him, should he not have tried to go to college? Like, what do you do with something like that? Like, that's who he is.
Yeah.
His optimism is part of who he is and part of what makes him beautiful. So you can't say, well, his optimism was diluted and he was wrong, and the solution is cynicism, right? At the same time, like, obviously, Turner survived.
Yeah.
And is a survivor in a variety of ways, right? And that scene, at the end or towards the end, where he runs into that guy at the bar, where it's funny because it ends with him asking, not ends, but there's a point where where the guy's like, what happened to that guy you used to hang out with, that kid you used to hang out with, and the guy's like, you don't remember?
Yeah.
But then it's like he barely remembered who that guy was. Like there's this kind of like they all kind of blended in this weird way. Like their individualities were robbed of them, And it is interesting because there's that little flash of that guy as a young person in that scene, and then we see him later, and it's like, oh right, that's that guy, right? But we have no real sense of him as a person or a character up until that point. It's just that scene. And there's this. I mean, we see like that guy is also a survivor, but he is broken. So yeah, what do you do with that? There's no answer to it.
It's so wild. Can I just read you this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. because I think it really embodies the complexity of the situation and what Elwood believes in, but that he is tested on in a way. Like this is he's sort of. These values are put on trial, but here it is. I think this is really, it is radical in the approach. So here's what Martin Luther King Jr. said. This is in one of the speeches. I can't remember which one.
Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators violence into our communities at the midnight hours and drag us out on some wayside road and beat us and leave us half dead. and we will still love you. But be ye assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer, and one day we will win our freedom, but we will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will so appeal to your heart and your conscience that we will win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory. This is the meaning of the nonviolent creed. This is the meaning of the nonviolent ethic. And it is my firm conviction that as we move on in the days ahead, we must work passionately and unrelentingly for first-class citizenship. That we must never use second-class methods to gain it.
I mean, this is a very like Christ-like notion of suffering as the redemption of the person who is perpetrating that on you. And I do think, I mean, it is this idea, this idealism that is being pushed right up against the kind of more pragmatic cynicism of Turner, who's, you know, early Turner. Again, it's complex, the arc of the character, but early Turner, who's saying basically, just shut up and you'll survive. And if you survive, then maybe down the road you can do something. But you can't, you're just suffering now isn't going to do anything, you know? And I do think, I think none of this is, you know, it's there in the film, but in these little fragments. And I think what's so brilliant about the film is this stuff is in the vicinity of it, but it's like you can literalize it like I just did with the MLK quote, but like anyway, it's part of the texture of the film. And what was interesting to me was I didn't know where this was going. So I had to do catch up for all of this. I couldn't think about any of this in the film itself.
Yeah.
I was just experiencing it. And then when we get to the end of the film, I didn't even know what to think to look for. So I had to ask Laura and I had to like try to find out like online, like what happens in the end? Because I couldn't remember exactly what happens to then think about the arc of the character because that ending happens so quickly, you know? And it's like, it's a film you have to sort of see again to then fully appreciate this character and his arc and then what that says about the film's, you know, value about, or, you know, what it's trying to say about these dilemmas and so on. And
in terms of why he's using the POV as well and why we've got this perspective shift back and forth, Chris Lambert at Film Colossus said something that I liked where he said the perspective shift from Elwood to Turner is not just a functional choice, it's a mechanism to show that Turner is someone who helps Elwood see himself, and Elwood does the same for Turner. And the back and forth between the two is not a gimmick for the sake of being interesting, but it highlights how the boys are a mirror for each other and grow individually because of their time together. And I wonder if that's like, if there is a perspective on this movie, it's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
totally.
No matter what we do, you know, it's going to be hard, and there isn't judgment on either side for what the perspective should be, except for that, like, all we can do is be open to other people influencing us and changing, and like having our hearts open to somebody else's point of view. And you know, I would like to think that Turner, while he is not particularly active, in his, you know, he's not an activist. He's not trying to make change. He's just surviving. He is melded with Elwood. I think we get that sense that he is a different person. He is part Turner, part Elwood at the end, and he has taken on some of Elwood's perspective and his ideals of the world, even if he's not necessarily living life exactly the way Elwood would.
Sure, yeah. I mean, speaking to the idea that these characters have melded, I do think that if there is something the film is endorsing, it is the idea that each of these ideas is present in each of us. That we share both sides. We share an Elwood and a Turner. And so Elwood Turner at the end is a kind of, and again, this speaks to the idea of him turning the camera on himself and sort of recognizing us as seeing him, is that we all in some way, this is the universality of these themes, are confronted with these very dilemmas. Of course, these poor children were confronted with it in the most horrific way. But we are all confronted with it. I started this sort of train of thought with the idea of like, well, look, we're facing a second Trump term, and what are we going to do? Like, we all have to face these choices. Are we just going to and we now know where big tech has decided to play. They're all going to go on the side of Turner. They've all decided to just get in bed with like Zuckerberg.
Turner.
They're all there. They're all just like, all right, Trump is our guy. Like, We're just now gonna go with him and work within that system rather than, stand up for whatever we believe in. Who knows what these guys actually believe in, but because it's unclear at all given what they've, because they've said the exact opposite thing, 10 years ago or whatever. So who knows? But if they had a spine, then maybe they would stick up for but they're not. But we each have to decide, and we all have to decide in smaller ways than that, right?
Yeah.
We all have to decide: are we going to be engaged with the news, or and are we going to go to political protests? How are we going to vote, etc.? And how engaged are we going to be at local politics and that kind of stuff? And so, I just think the film does these things that Malick does really well, I think, which is hyper specific, but then ultimately universal. Like by zooming in on the specificity, you could do the thing that you did, Bilge, where you're like, I have these images from the film that, they're my own memories that like are being interspersed. And that is kind of allowing us to like extract out these bigger universal things that are, or at least have more universal wide resonance, even though they're hyper specific to this place and time, these people, these characters. And I think that is a real success of the film. I will say one other thing that I think that was just, I was thinking about with the archival footage stuff. It's like space, and he's reading Silver Surfer, and there's various sort of almost like home video footage kind of various Black people. I don't know who these people are. And it did make me think like, yeah, this is a portrait of the hopes and dreams of a young boy that got quashed. Like that was what I was thinking, is that maybe he wanted to be an astronaut, and that was what got cut off. To your point about like what was lost in this is that
I think he is really interesting. I think at one point when she sends him a letter, doesn't she send him a clipping about the space race too at some point?
Really?
I think so. When he actually does get a letter and when it's not intercepted, he when he reads that Hattie wasn't able to see him before, he has a news clipping. I think it's about space. I think it's about.
I think that's stuff that Ramel Ross added. I don't remember that being much of a thing in the book. So it's like a way of adding more specificity to it.
Yeah, that maybe it matters to him.
He is a huge Tree of Life fan, so maybe he was trying to get a little bit of like, I gotta get a couple of shots of space.
Yeah,
in there,
some dinos.
But also because this is a really really smart, overachieving kid in the 60s.
Yes.
Who wasn't obsessed with space in the 60s?
That's
right.
The thing that kids were really into in the 60s and also the 70s. But like this was a thing. We forget that, right? Because the only people that think about space now are fucking billionaires.
Yeah.
But they're the only people that are allowed to dream of being astronauts nowadays. But, you could honestly chart an interesting history of America based on who was allowed to dream of being an astronaut over the course of 60 years,
Now my 5-year-old is like, I never want to go to space. That sounds dangerous and terrible. I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Dream big, buddy.
Well, I was speaking of Malick, his dinosaur, I was thinking, is the alligator. The image of the alligator which shows up. But then Laura found out a very upsetting detail about the alligator. Because I was like, why alligators?
Why alligators? I don't have an answer for the horse, though, in case you're curious.
Okay,
I also tried to find one about that. But
tell us about the alligator, because this, unfortunately, is sad.
Okay, this is Ramel on alligators. He says, I remember reading that Black children were used as alligator bait in the historic South, and it was just blowing my mind, especially because the more research I did, the more that I realized that it was like a mainstay practice, and that's how they would get alligators for meat and skin. And in that, the amount of history that had been lost, I think, and the amount of horror that had been suppressed, I think really came to the forefront.
I mean, that's almost like unbelievable.
We do see an image of a child being chomped, but you don't realize that that's like on purpose, like that he's being used as bait in that image.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible image. It's also a very Malickian image.
Yes.
I was also thinking about Werner Herzog. Were you thinking about?
Oh, yeah. The lizard.
Yeah. It was Bad Lieutenant.
Bad Lieutenant, yeah.
I was thinking more Thin Red Line, the way the alligator.
Oh, yeah.
But
Bilge, thank you so much for being here. And
thank you.
people should follow you on so at Bilge Ebiri on Twitter and Blue Sky. It's the same thing on Blue Sky, right?
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky just under my name,
Yeah.
and on Twitter. I'm
read
trying to
you
use
at-
all that shit less, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll still
Part
be
of the
there.
biz.
But
now,
follow Bilge and read, but most importantly, subscribe to New York Magazine and read Bilge on Vulture, and read Bilge does tons of both reviews of current movies, also retrospective stuff, long form stuff, interviews, retrospective interviews with directors. The ones you did with Coppola were fantastic. But yes, thank you so much, Bilge. You're the best.
Oh, thank you.
And we are at Cowspod we are at cowspod.com on Blue Sky. We don't really do Twitter anymore. Find us on the web at cowspod.com. Coming up in 2 weeks, it is the Blobskers, our annual award show, which we're doing with John Gabris. So check out that in 2 weeks, and we'll see you then. Bye.